Hello and welcome to today's episode. And today I'm speaking to a writer and writing coach, Kat Caldwell, who believes very strongly that each person on earth has a story to tell. Kat herself is a storyteller in her own right, having written an historical novel, Stepping Across the Desert, and a magical realism novel, An Audience with the King. In between coaching clients, interviewing creatives for the Pencils and Podsticks podcast, and writing her next novel, you can find Kat travelling the world, studying another language, reading a good book, or volunteering at her local church, with a cup of cold brew close by. So let's find out a little bit more about Kat and how she became a writer. Welcome to the Turning Readers into Writers podcast, where we teach beginner writers how to find the time and the confidence to write their first novel. I'm your host, Emma Desi, and I'm very excited that you're here. Thank you for joining me today, because if you've been longing to write your novel for forever, then this is the place to be. Think of this as your weekly dose of encouragement, of hand-holding and general cheerleading as you figure out how you're going to write your first novel. Trust me, as a mum of 3 young kids, I know how tricky it can be to tuck some time aside for yourself on a regular basis. And even when you do find that spare 5 minutes, you can feel so overwhelmed that no writing gets done. Trust me, I have been there, but this podcast is going to help you in practical ways, because once a week I'll be delivering an episode that gives you steps to building a writing routine, encouragement to build your confidence, and cheerleading until you reach the end. Okay, let's start. Well, hello Kat, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
I wonder if you wouldn't mind just sort of telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became a writer. Because I know that you've told me before that your childhood experiences had a quite a profound impact on how you grew up, and then were quite pivotal in you taking that step towards being a writer. So I wonder if you could fill us in on that.
Sure, absolutely. I grew up in the 80s, an 80s kid in Wisconsin, very rural. But at 12 years old, I found out that the man who I called father was not my father. He was not my biological father. And that opened up a whole, world for me. At the same time, I was hiding that I was being abused by a family member. And so my whole world was just, it was pretty chaotic, I think, in my head. So ever since probably that moment, I've kept a journal. Now, some of them I have thrown away because I didn't want people to know, what was going on. But I've always found that outlet of writing to be something of a therapy, to be therapeutic, and, kind of my confidant. And so I really felt like, I had to keep the fact that my parents were not really my parents. My mother was, but my father was not, a secret. They didn't want anybody to know. My brother and sister were the biological kids of this man. He's no longer in our family. So I had to keep all these things. I wasn't allowed to talk about anything to anybody, even to my friends. I just felt really trapped. Mm-hmm. And so writing was definitely a way for me to get out the anger that was in there, the confusion. And so it really started with journaling. But even before that, I really loved books and I really loved writing. So I think the two kind of converged together. And my first book, which is not really on the market anymore, was really my biggest therapy of trying to get out this idea of like, how do you find your identity if you don't even know, where you come from or who your father is or all these things. I can't say that it was a very well-written book, but it helped me a lot. I'm glad the publisher sort of collapsed because I think the writing was a bit immature, but it was a fiction story, trying to like get my story out without telling people what it was, because everything still was a secret at 20 years old where I wasn't allowed to tell anybody. Mm-hmm. So that definitely influenced me in my writing, my journaling, and then in my pursuit later on as I really definitely decided I was going to pursue writing as a career.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. I've spoken to a few writers actually, and it is amazing how, particularly those of us that write about quite dark subjects, it's amazing how many of those stories have emerged from journals. Yeah. And so, as you kind of alluded to there, even though it's not the therapy itself, and sometimes we come to it after we've been through that difficult situation, it's amazing just how putting it down on paper, having it in a journal can be, and then fictionalizing it can just be such a release. It's almost like saying goodbye to it in a way. To set it free. Yes,
I really love the idea of brain dumping. It's a new term I've heard, but I wish I had known about it as a kid, where it's you dump it all down and then you tear it up and you throw it away, but you get it out of your head. So, I mean, I guess I did that a little bit when I threw away some journals.
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely. Yeah. It kind of follows that idea that, a problem shared is a problem halved. Once you get it out into the world, it reduces its power over you.
True. True. I like that.
And so did those early experiences, do they still influence your fiction writing now? Or do you feel that you've been able to sort of move past that and then look at other subject matter now?
Yeah, I think they influence the idea that I am so curious about relationships between people. And that's pretty much the core focus of any of my books. I have a historical, I have a fantasy, and I'm just finishing a contemporary. And so I'm not really into a genre as much as I just want to study these characters. I'm fascinated by humans, by the fact that you can keep secrets, or, like we know things and yet our actions do not follow what we know to be true of history, or all these things. So I think it's still influence. I think I still want my characters to be as true to life as possible. Mm-hmm. I do enjoy a good chick flick every once in a while, or chick lit, I guess, in which, it's just fun. Uh-huh. But I do want my characters to have real issues and real problems, because growing up, I just saw just this idea of it, as long as you put a facade out there, then your life is okay. And then the kids around me being like, life is not okay. Like, I don't know what's going on here. And I assume that hasn't changed. Yeah. I mean, we are humans. We're all in this Pinterest era where, in Instagram and filters. So I assume that the teenagers and the 20-year-olds are still like, oh, why does reality not match what I
see on my
try? Yeah. So I think it has. I mean, I am not as angry, I guess, as a writer anymore. And I definitely cleaned up the first one that I did publish. I call it my first one because the other one doesn't really count. I cleaned up a lot of the anger as I went through therapy. And I think that therapy has released me from possibly making this sketch of men as, in the worst light possible.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about your writing. Okay. I'm always interested in people's routines and how you fit kind of the writing life in amongst everything else. So presumably, there's other work commitments, there's family commitments of one description or another. You've got a social life, all these things. How do you make the time in your life to fulfill this passion of yours?
Yeah, that is something that I struggled with for years, honestly. When I decided to really pursue it, I was living in France. My husband's company had moved us over Spain and then France, and I had 3 kids, and it was really difficult. I studied a lot of habits, books and podcasts and all these things. And I came to the conclusion a few years later, after lots of frustration, is all the advice is really great. You just have to look at your own life and then look at that advice and put it together. So after years of trying to wake up at 5 a.m. with a newborn and all this, I scrapped that. And I know. Why do we do this? I now, when I am writing, I put 5 days a week 1,500 words. And I really am satisfied by my pencil and paper agenda where I put a little box. If I get to check it off, I will feel really accomplished. There, of course, are days that I don't always make those 5 days. And that is always still working through, okay, did I do enough? Should I have made more time? I am still a full-time mom. My husband works crazy hours, so I basically have 5.5 hours to get everything done. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. My kids are older, so thankfully they, will leave me alone for longer stretches. But I have really pared it down. Yes, I would love to be able to go away for a weekend and write all weekend long. Mm-hmm. That's just not the reality. And so 1,500 words, there are days that I can get more done. There are days that I don't quite make it. I do, though, count if I am journaling, if I really feel like I just need to focus on maybe self-care and I journal, I count that. You know what? It was writing. It was part of my art. I do believe that you still have to practice other forms of writing, not just your book, because it keeps you sort of sharp. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's 1,500 words for me. If I'm really on a roll, I can get that done in less than 2 hours. Sometimes it takes longer because you have to think. But I also tell people I include research, so if I have to research, then it's not 1,500 words. It is an hour of research. I'm going to read, what happened and take notes. And that's still part of my work. And that's something that I didn't used to accept. But it's true. It is part of our work, and it is part of the book, because your book would not be what it is if you don't do your research. So I have learned over the years to be kinder to myself.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it, isn't it? Is yes. Knowing that we can't crank out a book every month like some writers seem to be able to. But if we are just persistent and we just keep going and we do a little bit every week, we'll get there eventually, and the story will emerge.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good message to put out there, is just keep going.
Just keep going, and sometimes it takes 3 years. I mean, this contemporary novel, I actually wrote 7 years ago. And then I set it aside because another baby came. And then I got the idea of my historical novel and worked on that. And then I revisited this one. And so, of course, it needed a whole overhaul, mm-hmm. But, mm-hmm. Don't give up on the things that you had. Maybe it just wasn't the right moment for them.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting that you've gone away from a project and then come back to it and still being passionate about it. So it was a good idea. Yeah.
Yes. Give your characters another chance. I can't say that they were perfect. I definitely need to give them more depth. But yeah, I mean, it was a whole book just on my computer. It's like, well, why not go back? But I also think I got more confidence because I finished 2 other books. And I think the more you write, the more you finish, the more confidence you get a bit, like, okay, I got a little more hang of this. I'm going to go back to these characters and flesh them out a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I think you sort of touched on something there that I always feel that it's important to finish that first draft, especially if it's your very, very first book, your first manuscript, that writing that first draft can, without meaning to sound too dramatic about it, can literally change your life and how you view yourself, especially if you're somebody who has wanted to write for a long time and has been putting it off and thinking, oh, I can't do it, I don't have it in me. And then once you write that first draft, then you do have it in you. And then you're better placed to make that decision about, yes, I want to pursue this. I really love it. It makes me feel great. Or actually, I'm really glad I've done this. And now I know it's not for me. And I can move on to the next creative thing that I want to try. But I totally
agree. And I think we need to remember that the great writers, anybody who's your favorite writer, you are not reading their first draft. It's just not. It's probably the 10th draft. And if it's anybody who hasn't self-published, they were working with an editor at the same time. And I totally believe that self-published writers should work with editors as much as they possibly can. But, the great classics, they were working with partners, their editors, on making sure that their characters that are in their head were as deep on paper.
Yeah. I read with envy about, in the olden days and sort of 50s and 60s, where an agent would take you on and mold you as a new young writer and shape your career and help you grow. Whereas now it feels like, as a young writer, a new writer, you've got to have a fully polished manuscript almost before you even take it to an agent. It feels like it's very changed days. Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't feel very fair, does it? I think we're probably losing a lot of great writers because of it.
Yeah. In fact, it was Val McDermid, actually. I was listening to an interview with her recently, and she's a very prolific crime writer who's not that much older than me, but she said even then in the 80s, she was writing in the 80s, and she was molded and shaped and groomed by this agent. And then she said even now, 20 years later, 40 years later we are now, it won't happen. Gosh,
no. I mean, I don't think any great artist doesn't study their craft or doesn't get help from a master, I mean, nobody just does it alone. And I think the idea that we expect indie authors to just put out a book all by themselves, and we put that on ourselves, like if I were a great writer, I would write a great first draft. It's like, well, not really. Like, I mean, we're putting a pressure on ourselves that nobody else ever did,
Yes. Now, talking of kind of having mentors and stuff, who are writers that you have admired, or who have you turned to help you with learn your craft or even learn the business side as well?
That's an interesting question. I have read almost, I am a multi-genre reader. I adore classics because I do actually like the description. I do like how Jane Austen goes on and on about, describing the room, which everyone tells you not to do anymore. I do love them. Now that you've asked me, all the people's names are going out of my head. One of my favorite books is the Poisonwood Bible, Barbara Kingsolver. I do like how she writes. She also is very descriptive. But the Poisonwood Bible made such an impression on me. I was probably in my early 20s, and she wrote from 5 different voices, 5 different characters who were all very different. And you could tell who was speaking each chapter, even if you didn't, read that each chapter was named by the name of the person. And that was just fascinating to me, that she could keep up with each character like that. And that made, sort of a turning point in my writing. I mean, for a while I thought, well, I would never be able to do that. And then I came back around of like, okay, how do you learn how to do that? I also read quite a few autobiographies or biographies. And The Boys in the Boat was a great one. Under a Scarlet Sky is one that I just read. And it also, I guess, has a lot of description. It fascinates me to read people, the way that they write, and then try to think, how would I use that just as an exercise? What do I love about it? Under a Scarlet Sky, I just love the way that they describe, the writer is describing Milan and at the end of World War II, and you can just see it, so trying to say, like, what was it about it that made me see the mountains or see Milan? What vocabulary did he use? And that makes me want to pursue, learning new words, or how would I use them without sounding pretentious? But I've interviewed quite a few indie authors on my podcast, and they each have just a different way of viewing the world. And so I love listening to their interviews and then reading their books and reading their blogs, and just realizing, especially as I get older and older, that there's nothing wrong with the way people see or write the world. It's just different. And if we can just be very curious and very open, David Rawlings, who's a writer in Australia, he talks about this too. And Vesper Stamper, I find her to be fascinating. She's an illustrator and writer, and she illustrates her own books. The idea of curiosity with those two just keeps going. If you're just curious about how people see the world, even if you don't maybe agree with the point of view they're writing in their book, but where did they come from? What are they trying to tell you? How might it be to be in their shoes? And those are the kind of authors that I always admire, and I feel like I need to get to their area, Yes. Okay, if I could just get there. David Rawlings is interesting because he's the first writer I've heard talk about a writer should have just sort of a motto or a theme. Just knowing that he's always going to take a story and have a full, I guess you would call them morals at the end, but really it's not just a story. It's about like really looking into life a little bit deeper through his characters. So I found that fascinating as well. And he definitely pulls it off in his book. So
you say, well, say again what he had. So he likes to have a sort of motto.
He has a motto. I could look it up for you. I think it's taking readers deeper into books that take you deeper into life or something. David
and this
Rawlings.
Is what he tries to do with each of his
right.
His
so he said, "This is who I am as a author, and this is what you will get from my books." Oh. And so I had never heard that before, and I thought, well, that's very interesting, which made me go back and think, well, who am I as a writer? And so I really study characters a lot. I really like to study people. Okay, well, that's okay. But I had never thought of that before, like processing my own art in that way.
No, I guess maybe, that's sort of part and parcel of that journey towards finding your voice and even kind of branding, I guess, just to extrapolate it to a more marketing or business advantage. Yay.
True.
So that's lovely. So some really nice and quite varied storytellers there. And what about sort of the craft side of it? Who do you turn to when you're looking to just work on an aspect of storytelling?
Oh, goodness. So I have a mountain of books of story prompts. I have one editor in England, and she is a fabulous editor who is not afraid to tell me when I need to clean things up or go deeper with a character. I think it's really important to find somebody who you jive with. Mm-hmm. Most editors are not afraid to tell you that, but I think just personality-wise, it's good to. I think she was probably the third editor I looked into. So as you get to the finish and you need an editor, don't just go with the first one. If you just don't really like what they say to you, the way they say it, just find another one. I have started to branch out a bit in looking towards mentors in other arts and seeing what they do. I'm reading Twyla Tharp's book just on creativity. She's a choreographer, and realizing that I should study more masters of other arts. And that's a new thing this year, especially during quarantine, as we all tried to figure out something to occupy ourselves with. But it makes sense to me because I think I can learn a lot from other writers with, how they did things, their habits, how they develop their skills. And I have their writing prompts and I use those as well. Or I try to imitate, just as an exercise, how they describe something and how I could describe the world around me using, try to follow in their ways, their footsteps. Mm-hmm. But I am branching out, looking at choreographers, musicians, and really the greats, and seeing how did they see the world, getting into their autobiographies, their, what they left the world with, and trying to branch out a little bit there.
Yeah. Well, kind of talking of looking at other art forms, I know you host a podcast, and you mentioned it just before. Tell us a little bit about that, because I think you're keen to talk to creatives of all different types, not just fiction writers.
Yes, absolutely. So I started the podcast last September 2019. I can't believe it's a year. So it's called Pencils and Lipstick. At first, it was just going to be pencils or something. Who knows? But I realized, my brother's a photographer. My sister-in-law is a muralist. And I am quite fascinated by the fact that people can, take clay and make something beautiful, or my sister-in-law can look at a blank wall that's giant and actually not get confused on what to paint. Like I just find the mind of the artist fascinating. And so I wanted to expand it to other people. So I've had a lot of writers on because I do want to support as many writers as possible, but I've had painters, I've had people who really dip into making handmade soaps and working with their hands there. A master candle maker, she calls herself. Wow. Another one. I've had bakers, musicians. I am hoping to get a dancer on soon. They don't like to be interviewed, I guess. I'm about to have
writers. My goodness.
Yeah, they're like, oh, I'm so shy. So anything that you consider creative, I would love to talk to people about. What was your journey? How did you become bold enough to go out into the world and say, this is my creativity and I want to show it to you? Because I think all of us struggle at some point in thinking that nobody cares or that it's not a real job or, that I should be doing something else. And I just don't think that's true. I think we're all created differently. And some of us have creativity, artistic talents. Yeah. And to keep those inside, I think is just a shame. I mean, looking historically, artists were always revered. And now we're just sort of like, oh, go do your real job and then go do that as a hobby. And even if it is a hobby, you should be allowed to speak of it and to call yourself a master of the art, if you pursue it. So it's really a place, and be proud of it. So it's a place for people to tell their story and then to encourage those who wish to do that as well, to encourage them to go for it.
Well, that's kind of fits in really nicely with the idea. I know that you feel very strongly that mindset is an important aspect of a creative's life. I believe that as well, and particularly with writing. I kind of think if you get your mindset straight, you're 50% of the way there. So what would you suggest to new beginner writers out there if they're, doubting their abilities, if they're having that comparisonitis that we hear about, if they don't think they've got it in them? And maybe, we do hear people do tell us that they family members or friends tell them it's a waste of time and they shouldn't be doing it. And so they're embarrassed about it. What words of advice or encouragement would you have for those writers to help them push past that and own it, if you like?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say almost every writer or artist has that experience, unfortunately. And I think now you can find some encouragement through podcasts and through other people's blogs. So I would encourage you to find them. There are quite a few artists now who have their podcasts and they just want to show that creativity is a real thing. It is a real job. I think all of us go through that idea of somebody, and it's usually somebody very close to us, claiming that they're just looking out for us and they want us, to be happy or to be successful. I think in the end, you have to realize that you can have all the money in the world. If you're not doing what you were created to do, you're not going to be content and you're not going to be happy. Mm-hmm. And I really think a lot of people who are not happy, but make quite a bit of money, they're just not doing what they're supposed to be doing with their life. If you were created to sculpt or to write or to sing and you're not doing it, there's a part of you that's not being used. And so I would say it is difficult, but every day to just take one step towards your creativity and just feel like this fulfills me. And to start being bold enough to tell the people, I understand how you feel. I understand that you love me. Assume always the best of the other person. But this fulfills me. It makes me happy and it makes me content. And I would love it if you would support me in it. You won't always find that, but you can find other groups on Facebook. It's not the greatest place, but you can find it. Other podcasts, people who are pursuing it. And I would say not to give up. I mean, I am much older than the person I was. I'm turning 40 and it took me a long time to get that confidence up to pursue it. I think a lot of us do take those decades to get there. We pursue other things. I was a translator. I was a waitress. I was secretary. I need a career. But really in the end, if whatever fulfills you is what you should follow.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you're just going to be happier. It's okay if you don't have 3 iPads, if you're happy.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned there that finding a community can be a really integral part of finding your creative self. And I know that you have an online community as well. I wonder if you'd share a little bit about that with us.
Yeah, it's something new that I started in August. It is a group of writers. Most of them are new writers working on their first book. And it's a place where I published my first one. I hit the button, that publish button on in November of 2017. And then, as many indie writers as happens, you say, "Oh, nobody knows my book is there. What did I miss?" And I was very much against social media. I didn't understand email marketing. I just wanted to write a book, and I just wanted to put it out, and I wanted that to be the end. And unfortunately, that's not how things are anymore. And so I spent 2 years, probably 2.5 years. And that's part of the reason why I started the podcast too, is I read 50 business books in 2018, realizing that most of them were not for creative businesses. Most of them were for other businesses, but trying to learn. I listened to probably hundreds of hours of podcasts on what am I supposed to be doing, and where am I supposed to be going, and what is branding, and who am I as an author, and why can't people just buy my book and me not do any of this work? And then I started the podcast. I can learn from other people, where they are, how did they get there?
Mm-hmm.
Are you making money from this? I want to make money too, and I want people to read my book. How do you get people to review your book? And all these questions that I had. And so it's been 3 years now since I hit that publish button and then spent all that time. And I realize most people don't have that time. I'm blessed to be a stay-at-home mom other than a writer. And yes, that's still a crazy job. But, those 5 hours a day, I was just trying to figure out what to do next. And a lot of people don't have that time, or they just feel lost. And I've heard a lot of writers just give up. Mm-hmm. And so I bring in at least 2 masterminds a month. We do lives. Just in 2 days, we'll be doing a live on what your lead magnet is for email marketing. We're really focusing on email marketing this month because that confused me to no end for a long time. Why should I start before I even have a book? I don't understand this. Where should I go? So we focus on different things, all the marketing you have to do. I bring in masterminds. This month, we're going to have a mastermind with another author about book launching, and another artist about habits and how he has kept up the habit of drawing every day for 8 years.
Wow.
So he does a lot of mindset. And so it is a paid membership, but it's $47 a month. You get lives with me. You get to chat with me whenever you want. My hope is that we will grow as a community. We will be the beta readers for our book launches. We will support each other. I think that's what people need more than anything. Mm-hmm. When your book is done, where do you find an editor? So I have 3 different editors coming in mm-hmm. in 2021. And then when your book is launched, the more people who talk about your book, the better. If they can read it, if they can share it on their newsletter, and just sort of that spiderweb effect of trying to get your book launched as best as possible, because it's not something I understood with my first one. I just didn't get it. And I want to help as many writers as possible get it and get their book into the hands of the people that should have it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. That sounds like a fantastic group. What's the group called?
It's called the Creative Writing Community, the Pencils and Lipstick Creative Writing Community. It's on Facebook. You can also find it on my website, catcaldwell.com. And you can go through the free mini course first if you want. So I have a free mini course on my website.
Tell us about that.
So that's just a little 5-day mini course, because I think a lot of people have a hard time just starting, the mindset. I think just like you and I were talking about, like, it's hard to think that you're even worthy of writing this book. Who am I to write this book? I can't ever finish this. So we go through mindset. It's a 5-day emails, 1 email a day. You get worksheets. The first thing we tackle is mindset. Yes, absolutely. You should write your book. it doesn't matter if it's a romance story, that's been written before. They've all been written before, technically, but you're a different person. You have a different point of view. Your story is different than anyone else's. And by golly, I want to read another romance book. So please write mine. I mean, we're always looking for more. And I even tell people, as much as there are people who love classics, there's a whole swath of people in the world who aren't going to go back and read books from the 80s. Mm-hmm. They're just not going to do it, but they might read your book. Maybe they are your ideal reader. So if you don't write it, they can't read it. So we tackle mindset, content, high, low content, how to really decide what your book is about. Titles, how important they are, book covers, how important they are, your ideal reader. So you should write not to everybody, which is something that's very hard to grasp mm-hmm. at first. Mm-hmm. But you should be writing only to specific people. Mm-hmm. And then we go into habits and characters, and that's all free. I do lives. That's a free Facebook group. It's Start Writing Your Book in 5 days. So you can sign up on my website as well.
All right, I'll link to all of these in the show notes. Sure. So
yes,
don't worry, everybody. I'll have that for you.
I know we're always like driving in our car trying to write down things on the podcast, So yeah, I'm sure the links will be there. But so you can always try and see the group on the free group is not as active as it's Facebook.
Okay. But I think also that the fact that paid content, when you make that commitment and investment in yourself for paid content, you're investing. And so you're much more likely to show up and get involved and get your money's worth. Putting it
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And you know what? I debated doing it for free because I honestly just want writers to know that that there is help out there. Mm-hmm. But you're right. A lot of people were not really being active when it was free. Mm-hmm. So I think just like anything, I too am guilty of downloading free courses and never touching them.
Yeah. I think I've heard it said recently, and it's maybe a Tony Robbins thing, but the transformation happens when you make the investment, because that's
true.
You've not only financially, but you've mentally made the investment as well.
True. So, that's true.
What I love about your content, though, is that there's a lot of it that's very business orientated. And when I look around, certainly when I was starting out and I would look around and what's out there for beginners, a lot of it is about the craft. A lot of it is about getting the first draft written, which is what I focus on. But actually, particularly if you want to be indie, but even if you want a traditional deal, you have to be so much more business aware now. So having somebody, even this 5-day mini course, that's a gem there, just opening your eyes to what you do need to think about as a writer. It's not solely about the work. It's predominantly about that, but it's not just that anymore. And we need to be, at the very least, aware of all the other things that go on. So I think that's fantastic, a wonderful offering.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate sometimes in our heads because the last thing we want to do is worry about LinkedIn. And I'm with you. I was there for a very long time. But the truth is, the more you brand yourself as an author, and I didn't get that, but you are a personal brand. J.K. Rowling is a brand. Mm-hmm. Then there's Harry Potter. So there are two things that she has going for her. But you are a brand. Whatever your author name is, whether it's a pen name or yourself, people want to know about you. They want to know about your life. They want to see you. They are not going to see your next book. Most of us do not go looking, Stephen King and, whoever else, they're all prominent on the Amazon line or the Barnes and Noble line, if they're actually open, thinking back to normalcy in life. But, it's hard otherwise to find that one book you read that one time and where are they? Well, if you're on their newsletter, you're following them and you're excited by what they're doing and you see more of their life and their writing process. So just realizing that you need to find the fans, and you need to find the fans by putting yourself out there. Mm-hmm. And it's a difficult thing, I think, for writers to comprehend because we don't want to.
And let you say you just want to write the book. Let someone else do the other stuff.
Just find my book, guys, But yeah, and then to find the support through different authors. There are great ways to collaborate with other authors, which I think is fabulous, supporting one another. So.
Well, Kat, I'm just conscious of time. I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed chatting to you. Can you just remind people where they can find you online?
Yes, it's catcaldwell.com. Cat with a K and Caldwell with a C. And on Facebook, it's Cat Caldwell Author. Instagram, catcaldwell.author. Apparently, there's lots of Cat Caldwells out there. You never knew that before social media. So I think the best place is my website. You can find all my lead magnets there. If you want to know what a lead magnet is, you can definitely DM me. I will gladly tell you what that is, or any business. I'm always open, honestly, for people to ask me questions, whether it's Instagram, Facebook, or you just get on my newsletter and you literally hit reply to the email. I don't profess to know everything, but I am somebody who researches a lot and have researched for the last 2 years. But yeah, they can find me on catcaldwell.com. All my books are there. All the groups and everything.
Fantastic. Now, I realized we didn't actually name your books, but you want to just tell us the sort of last one that was out and where we can find it.
Yeah, absolutely. The last one was Magical Realm Fantasy. You always need to find out the genres and all the subgenres of everybody. So it's called An Audience with the King. That started out as a short story and quickly became a full book. You can find it on Amazon. You can find it on Barnes & Noble, on Kobo. Pretty much anywhere you find books.
Fantastic. Kat, thank you once again, and take care.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Before you go, I wanted to tell you about my Patreon page. Whenever anyone supports the show, it expresses just how much you're enjoying the content and how much you want it to continue. Your support helps maintain the podcast and keeps it going. It means I can create better resources for you when you're listening to the podcast or checking out the webpage. It means I can focus on getting a higher reach of audience. And when we get a higher reach of audience, we can get more guests. Guests that are really going to help you. And then who knows where it'll go from there. As a new podcaster and someone who's starting out and finding their feet in the podcasting world, just as I'm helping you find your feet in the writing world, I can't do it alone. I always need help, so I'd love it if you would support the show by signing up. There's just one tier, $3 a month, and for that I'll make sure that each week I'm delivering the best podcast I can for you. And as a way of saying thanks, I'll give you a personal shout out on the show. So check out the page at patreon.com/Emma Desi. That's patreon.com/Emma Desi. See you next time.